Hello and welcome to CovidKeepers versus CovidBleepers. This is a follow-up to the PolyMAT Presents 2 event from the 17th of March, where we'll be looking at your survey results and deciding whether each of the items that we surveyed you about is a COVID keeper or a COVID bleeper. The first item that we asked you about was virtual parents' evenings, and this one you can see the survey response in the top right. 71% said that they wanted to retain virtual parents' evenings. And this is an excellent response, and I can see why. You can see at the bottom here, we've got lots of tweets from various people, both parents and professionals, regarding parents' evenings and the experiences that they've had at parents' evenings over the years. So the ones right on the left there are really to do with physical parents' evenings, and the ones on the right to do with virtual parents' evenings. And you can see all of them give a very clear message. And I think when we survey parents and students about this as well, we'll get a similar response. So virtual parents' evenings for me is definitely a keeper. Next one was to do with year group zoning. So this is where you might timetable all of your students in year 7 to be in a particular part of the building, year 8 in another part of the building, and so on. You can see some comments from specialist subject staff who are indicating that this does not work very well for them. So art, drama, DT, etc. They need to be back in their own rooms. And for that reason, we're saying this one is a bleep. Next, hand sanitizer cleaning packs. And in terms of this question, we asked, should the school continue to provide these items, or should it go back to people bringing their own? Clearly, 91% of respondents retaining is very high. There are long-term health benefits of doing this. And whilst there is a cost and a resourcing implication for schools, it's clear that this is a keeper. Next up is virtual assemblies, and the survey suggests that most people want to revert to in-person assemblies. Assemblies are really important, part of culture, ethos, collective acts of worship, and so on. However, there are some issues with reverting to the physical that we need to consider. One is, how do we involve those students who are absent for whatever reason? Perhaps we record the assembly for them to watch at a later date. The other issue is how we deal with the hygiene practices around assemblies. So if we're gathering lots of students into the same location, often like sardines in some places, what have we learned from the coronavirus pandemic that would enable us to make that a safer environment for assemblies to take place in? It's clear that we want assemblies back, but we need to change how we do them to ensure that they are safe for all involved. So for us, this is, I believe. Next one is lunchtime zoning, and this is quite close on the survey, but lots of people saying that they want to retain it. 60% want to retain this. This is to do with break times and lunch times, and the idea that certain year groups inhabit a certain part of the school site. And there's been various comments made about the improvement in behaviour as a result of doing this, and the ease of follow-up with behaviour as a result of doing this. So our view is that this is a keeper. Next, intervention sessions or enrichment sessions being delivered virtually. You can see again, it's a very close call, but lots of people, 58%, suggesting that we should revert to physical enrichment sessions and intervention sessions. Various comments about this needing to be quite nuanced, sometimes virtual, sometimes physical, depending on the purpose and the cohort. I think probably had we asked the question separately about enrichment sessions and intervention sessions, we might have got two very different answers. And also if we'd asked about, say, Saturdays and half-term sessions, as opposed to after school sessions, Therefore, on this one, we think we should look at the best of both and sometimes deliver physical intervention and enrichment sessions and sometimes deliver virtual ones. Next is electronic homework setting, and many schools will have been doing this pre-pandemic anyway, but you can see there's 81% of respondents suggesting that we should set homework electronically. There's a potential cost-saving benefit in not using planners, not purchasing planners for students to use, and planners have always had problems with them anyway, particularly in terms of how students record and how you get to see that as a parent. There were some comments in the feedback about giving flexibility to teachers to set in the way that best suits the topic that they're delivering. But I think that's more of a comment on how the homework gets handed in rather than how it gets set. It's certainly very beneficial to set all the homework in one location that parents, students can access, for instance, via an app such as WeDuck or Show My Homework or Microsoft Teams. So for us, whilst we need to work on the specifics of how this should be done, this is a keeper. Next up, virtual CPD and briefings. And again, we could have asked this question in two parts, to ask about CPD and to ask about briefings. There may be some differences in people's responses on those items. There was also some similar queries that we had with virtual assemblies. If we're not doing virtual briefings or virtual CPD, how do those staff who perhaps are absent still get their entitlement to that CPD, or how do they get to hear about those notices? There are lots of different things that you could come up with in order to make that possible. And there were various comments as well about perhaps having some CPD sessions and some briefings being virtual, depending on the time of day, depending on the topic, rather than all of them being virtual, all of them being physical. There's also some questions about, if we do keep them virtual, how we ensure that staff are engaged with them. That needs some more looking into. But 75% of respondents said that they wanted to keep virtual CPD and virtual briefings. So for us, this is a keeper. Next, we've got virtual meetings, which is a similar thing, but obviously there's going to be different kinds of meeting that happen. We talked in the question about departmental meetings, about year group meetings. As a school, we also have wrap meetings in both of our schools. We have a variety of start times and end times for meetings, both before school, during the day and after school. So we probably need a more nuanced answer to this question. Nevertheless, you can see that the survey response is heavily on the retain side. So people have enjoyed virtual staff meetings, the efficiency that has been brought in by having virtual meetings has been very much commented upon, and it also supports flexible working. So whilst we may not have all meetings going virtual and many will continue to be physical, the idea of virtual meetings is one that we think is a keeper. Next, streaming lesson explanations. So this has been something that's happened during COVID-19, where students have been at home for self-isolation or for other reasons. And often what has happened is the teacher who's in a physical classroom with students in front of them streams that live to students who are at home. Now, we need to take the answer to this alongside the response to recorded lesson explanations. But you can see that 67% of respondents felt that we should no longer be streaming lesson explanations live to students who are at home. And staff, as we'll see, are clearly more comfortable with the idea of doing recorded explanations than they are with streamed ones. So for us, this is a bleep. And on to recorded lesson explanations, you can see that it's still got a hefty proportion of respondents saying that we should go back to not doing this. And this will be mainly concerns about workload, I'm sure. I think when we do this survey with parents and students, we're likely to see it go the opposite way. parents and students will want to be able to get access to recorded lesson explanations when they aren't able to be in lessons. That's my best guess at this stage in terms of what parents and students will say. And if we're not recording, how do we ensure those absent students don't miss out on the kind of modelling and scaffolding that teachers routinely do that enables learning? It's not the same to provide just digital resources, revision guides, PowerPoint presentations from a lesson, as it is to have your teacher explain to you how to do things. We also need to think about how prepared we'll be for future disruptions to school, future pandemics. You know, can we build banks of recordings for that purpose? I think probably there is a workload issue around this. So going with the survey, it is a bleep, but I'd like to return to it and find a way in which we can still provide lesson explanations to students in some capacity. Next is the publishing of digital resources. So this has gone the other way and is looking at 80% of staff saying that they want to continue to provide digital resources to students so that if they are absent for whatever reason, or if they just want to recap on what they've learned in the lesson, they can access the PowerPoint, they can access the worksheets digitally. And the key question for me is where that goes. So probably using Microsoft Teams or using Microsoft SharePoint and the new gateway that we're developing along with Cloud Design Box for the trust. But it's definitely a keeper. Next is electronic classwork submission. And we need to take this question in line with the question on digital devices in the classroom, which we'll come to shortly. You can see that the survey respondents, 61% of them suggested we should continue to have electronic submission of classwork. And I would suggest that probably also refers to electronic submission of homework. There is a follow-up needed in terms of whether this means staff are comfortable with the idea of electronic assessment as well. But clearly electronic classwork can work and is something that teachers would like to continue with. So for us, this is a keeper. Next, we asked about virtual open evenings. Now, I think it's important on this one to understand that different schools will have approached open evenings in different ways. Those schools who did what they called a virtual open evening, but actually was just them publishing, you know, some information on their website about the school and perhaps a virtual tour. That's not the same as what other schools did for virtual open evenings. The practice that Woolwich Polytechnic School for Boys in particular did around this was really strong and involved parents attending a live meeting where they got to ask questions of members of the senior leadership team and others who responded live to those questions. So depending on what experience people will have had of virtual open evenings will depend on how they responded to this question. We probably need to involve prospective parents and students in these conversations as well. The idea of travelling to the school to walk around it, the sort of rush of parents that can happen, the issues with that, you know, we need to think about that, and we need to decide whether perhaps we could look at a package whereby most of the open evenings are physical, but perhaps one is virtual to enable those staff who need a bit more flexibility, those parents, I should say, who need a bit more flexibility to still attend. So for us, this is a best of both. Let's use both virtual and physical means to deliver our open evenings in future. Next is the idea of staggered start and end times to the school day. This was not very popular amongst the survey respondents, and everyone seems to want to go back to traditional start times and end times. There is obviously research out there that suggests that later start times for older year groups helps them learn. But on the whole, you know, there are so many issues with having staggered start and end times, not least for the timetabler, but our view is we want to revert, and therefore this is. Next up, we mentioned it earlier, is to do with devices and lessons, and this, of all the questions that we asked, is the closest in terms of what people thought. We've got 51% saying we should go back to no devices in lessons, and 49% saying that we should have devices in lessons. So it's a difficult one to interpret. There are some comments that were made in response to the survey, particularly asking whether we can provide students with tablets and laptops and so on for use in the classroom for in-class work, such as electronic quizzing and other activities. There was a very common suggestion that this shouldn't apply to devices outside school. A lot of work's been done on that by the government, and delivering devices to schools so that students can use devices in the home. And I think unless we keep that up, unless the government keep that up and schools support it, we're likely in a few years' time to be back in the same situation where students no longer have access at home, particularly if they come from a disadvantaged background. So we need to keep that up. But this question was about in school, and it is really difficult to establish what the right route is here. Lots of comments about phones and the fact they should continue to be banned for behaviour and safeguarding reasons. I think probably a school-owned device strategy, such as laptop trolleys and tablet trolleys, and being able to use them for specific reasons for very particular purposes, is probably the way to go. And so what we're saying is this is the best of both. Let's have devices that we use in school, and we use them when we need them, and we don't use them when we don't. And the last one was to do with ad hoc meetings happening virtually, particularly with parents, and the 67% of respondents said that we should keep these. And again, I think this really makes sense. It allows a lot of flexibility for parents so that they don't necessarily have to take time off work to come in and have those meetings. So the ability for these ad hoc meetings to take place virtually supports them, it supports teachers, and for us, this is a keeper. So those are our COVID keepers and COVID bleepers based upon your responses to our survey. Are there any that we missed? Please do let us know in the comments. And the survey is still open. If you want to use the survey yourself with your own school and get your own teachers' views, then please do the survey. At the end of the survey, there'll be a link for you to duplicate that and use it for your own school. Thanks very much for joining us for COVID Keepers versus COVID Bleepers and for PolyMAT Presents. We'll see you again soon.